What they don't tell you about ghost stories is that some of them are real. The monsters aren't under your bed. They're in our history books, with blank spaces where their names should be. We love to believe that in the end, the good guys always win and the bad guys get caught. But that's not always true. There are some people who committed the most awful crimes you can imagine and then just disappeared. They walked away. They melted back into the crowd and maybe lived a long, happy life. They could be anyone. A quiet neighbor, a friendly coworker, a grandfather. These aren't just stories. They are the chilling, unsolved cases of serial killers who are, for all we know, still out there. And today, we're gonna look into the shadows they left behind, starting with a man who gave himself a name and dared the entire world to figure out who he was. The Zodiac. California in the late 1960s was supposed to be about peace and love. But a dark shadow fell over the San Francisco Bay Area. A shadow with a strange name. The Zodiac. This wasn't a killer who hid in the dark. He wanted everyone to know his name, but he made sure nobody knew his face. His game was terror, and he played it with terrifying skill. It all started on a cold night in December 1968, on a lonely road. Two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were on their first date. They parked. Then, 7 months later, it happened again. Another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, were parked in a car at a park, just a few miles from the first crime scene. A car pulled up behind them, its lights blinding them. A man walked up to their window, holding a flashlight and a gun. He said nothing. He just opened fire, shooting them both multiple times. He then calmly walked back to his car and drove away. Darlene died. Michael, by some miracle, survived. He was shot in the face, neck, and chest, but he lived to tell the police what happened. But he couldn't give them a good. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to a public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. He was claiming both crimes. He was telling them he was a serial killer. But the phone call was just the beginning. The very next day, 3 different newspapers in the San Francisco area received a letter. The handwriting was messy, like a child's, but the message was not. The writer took credit for the murders and proved it by sharing details that only the killer could know. But there was something else in the letters, something that would make this case famous. Part of each letter was written in a secret code, a cipher made of strange symbols. The killer demanded that the newspapers print his coded message on their front page. If they didn't, he promised he would go on a killing spree and kill 12 people over the weekend. The newspapers did what he asked. The killer had just announced himself to the world. And at the end of his letter, he signed off with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. It was the sign of the Zodiac, the Riddle Man. The whole state of California was gripped by fear. Who was this person? Sending riddles to the press. A schoolteacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Hardin, saw the cipher in the paper and decided to try and crack it. They worked on it all day and all night. And they did it. They solved the puzzle. Everyone was waiting for the big reveal, hoping it would give them the killer's name or a clue to his identity. But the message inside was even more terrifying than they could have imagined. The decoded message said, "I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. No name, no clues, just the ramblings of a monster who believed his victims would be his slaves in the afterlife." The Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was building his own twisted version of heaven. He continued to send letters, taunting the police and the public. He would reveal more details about his crimes, things only he could know, just to prove it was really him. He loved the attention. He was controlling the story, and the police were always one step behind. Then, he decided to change his game. His next attack was his boldest and most terrifying yet. In September 1969, another young couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were having a picnic by a beautiful, peaceful lake called Lake Berryessa. Suddenly, a man appeared. He was wearing a strange, hooded costume, like an executioner's hood, with the Zodiac symbol stitched on the front. He was holding a gun. He told them he was an escaped convict from a prison in another state and needed their car and money to get to Mexico. He seemed calm, and he made the couple tie each other up with rope he had brought. They did what he said, hoping he would just take their stuff and leave. But once they were helpless, his story changed. He pulled out a huge knife. He stabbed Brian 6 times in the back. Then, he stabbed Cecilia 10 times. He wasn't in a hurry. After he was done, he walked calmly back to their car and drew the Zodiac symbol on the door with a pen. Underneath it, he wrote the dates of his first 2 attacks and this new one. Then, he drove to a payphone, and just like before, he called the police to report his own crime. He told them where to find the victims and said, "I'm the one who did it." Brian Hartnell survived. Cecilia Shepard died 2 days later. Brian was able to tell the police everything. He described the man's voice and his strange, calm behavior. But because of the hood, he never saw his face. The killer was a ghost. Just 2 weeks later, the Zodiac killed again. This time, it was different. He didn't attack a couple in a lonely place. He shot a taxi driver, Paul Stein, in the middle of a rich San Francisco neighborhood. It looked like a robbery, but it wasn't. The Zodiac took the driver's wallet and car keys and a piece of his bloody shirt. Why the shirt? Because he was going to send it to the newspapers. A few days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was another piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. It was proof. In the letter, the Zodiac mocked the police. He said that after he killed the driver, police officers had actually stopped and talked to him, but they let him go because they were looking for a black suspect, and he was a white man. He even threatened to attack a school bus full of children. The fear in the city was so real, you could feel it. People were afraid to go out at night. Police officers were assigned to guard school buses. The Zodiac was in complete control. He sent more and more letters and cards, some with more ciphers. One of his most famous ciphers, the 340 cipher, remained unsolved for over 51 years. When it was finally cracked in 2020 by a team of amateur codebreakers, it didn't reveal his name. It just contained more of his taunts. It read, in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me." After 1974, the letters stopped. The Zodiac Killer, after terrorizing California for years, just went silent. The man who was never found. So who was he? The police investigated thousands of suspects. The evidence. There were a lot of things that pointed to Allen. A friend once told police that Allen had talked about an idea for a story where he would hunt people, call himself Zodiac, and send coded messages to the police. This was before the Zodiac killings even started. He wore a watch with the Zodiac symbol on it. Police found weapons and bomb-making materials in his home. The survivor of the second attack, Michael Majo, picked Allen out of a lineup of photos years later. He was reportedly near the scene of two of the murders on the days they happened. The problems. But for all the things that looked suspicious, there was always something that didn't quite fit. Arthur Leigh Allen died in 1992. He was never charged with the crimes. The case is still officially open. To this day, people are still trying to solve it. They analyze the letters, they study the ciphers, they look for new suspects. But the Zodiac has remained a ghost. He created a character, a supervillain, and he played the part perfectly. He killed at least 5 people, maybe more, and hurt many others. He caused years of fear and panic, and he got away with it. He's the ultimate boogeyman, the man who gave himself a name, but was never truly known. The Long Island serial killer. Sometimes, the search for one person can uncover a nightmare you never knew was there. That's exactly what happened on the South Shore of Long Island, New York. In 2010, the police were looking for a missing young woman named Shannon Gilbert. The search led them to a lonely stretch of road called Ocean Parkway near Gilgo. In December of that year, a police officer and his dog were walking along the side of the road through the thick, thorny bushes. The dog started acting strange, and the officer went to see why. There, hidden in the brush, he found a skeleton wrapped in a burlap sack. It was a human body. The police immediately started a full search of the area. A few days later, they found another body, and then another, and another. All 4 were women. All 4 were found in the same area, wrapped in the same kind of material. The police realized they weren't just looking for one missing person anymore. They had stumbled upon a serial killer's dumping ground. These first 4 women became known as the Gilgo 4. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello. They were all young women who had worked as online escorts. They had all disappeared over a period of 3 years. The killer was smart. He used burner phones to contact the women, so the calls couldn't be traced back to him. He was careful, but he also had a dark, cruel side. He liked to play games. After killing Melissa Barthélemy, he used her phone to call her teenage sister. He made a series of short, cruel calls, telling the young girl terrible things about what he had done to her sister. It was a way of torturing the family, of showing his power. The discovery of the Gilgo 4 was shocking enough, but the story was far from over. As the police widened their search in the spring of 2011, they found even more human remains along that same lonely highway. They found the partial remains of another woman, Jessica Taylor. Parts of her body had been found years earlier in a different location. Pause. They found the body of a young Asian man dressed in women's clothing. They found the bones of a little girl, a toddler, who was maybe 2 years old. They found the skull of another woman. The beach had become a graveyard. In total, parts of at least 10 different people were found. And to make it even more confusing, the bodies seemed to have been left there over a long period of time, maybe starting as far back as the mid-1990s. The police were facing a huge and terrifying puzzle, but her family has always believed she was another one of the killer's victims. The ghost on the parkway. For more than a decade, the case went cold. The Long Island serial killer, or LISK, became a modern mystery. A faceless monster who had hunted and killed people for years without leaving a trace. The police had a few clues. The profile. They believed he was likely a white man, between his mid-20s and mid-40s at the time of the murders. He was smart and organized. The police were able to figure out that the calls were made from busy areas in New York City, like Madison Square Garden and Times Square. The killer was hiding in plain sight, using the chaos of the city to cover his tracks. But for years, That was it. The trail ended there. The families of the victims waited for answers that never came. The killer was a ghost. He had used the internet and cell phones to find his victims, tools that were supposed to make the world more connected. How did they find him? They went back to those old burner phone records. With new technology, they were able to narrow down the location of the phones to a small area around Huerman's office in the city and his home on Long Island. They started watching him. They found out he had made thousands of disturbing searches online for information about the victims and the investigation. He was obsessed with his own crimes. They found a car that matched a witness's description from the disappearance of one of the victims. And then they got the final piece of the puzzle. An investigator saw Huerman throw a pizza box into a trash can in Manhattan. They grabbed the box and tested the DNA from the leftover crust. It was a match to DNA found on the burlap sack used to wrap one of the victims. Rex Huerman has been charged with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4. Melissa, Megan, and Am. He is the main suspect in the 4th, Maureen. But here is the chilling part that keeps this case on our list. What about the other bodies? What about the toddler, the young man, and the other women whose remains were found scattered along that desolate beach? Police aren't sure if Huerman is responsible for all of them. The way those other victims were killed and disposed of was different in some cases. This raises a terrifying question. Was there more than one killer using Ocean Parkway as a dumping ground? Did one monster's evil acts cover up the crimes of another? The arrest of Rex Huerman was a huge step, but it hasn't solved the entire mystery. The ghosts of Gilgo Beach have not all been laid to rest. The full truth of what happened on that lonely stretch of sand is still buried. And for the families of some victims, the killer is still just a shadow. The West Mesa bone collector. Imagine walking your dog on a sunny day. It's a normal afternoon. But then you see something sticking out of the dirt. A bone. You get a little closer and realize with a cold feeling of dread that it's a human bone. That's exactly what happened in 2009 in a place called the West Mesa, a desert area on the edge of Albuquerque, New Mexico. That one bone led to one of the biggest and most disturbing crime scenes in American history. When the police started digging, they found more than just one bone. They found a skeleton, and then another, and another. It was a mass grave. Over the next few weeks, they unearthed the remains of 11 girls and women, plus an unborn baby. Someone had been using this empty stretch of desert as their private burial ground for years. The media nicknamed the victims. All of the victims were women who had been involved in drugs and prostitution in Albuquerque. They were people living on the edges of society, people whose disappearance might not be noticed right away. This is exactly what predators look for. Their names were Jamie Barella, Monica Candelaria, Victoria Chavez, Virginia Cloven, Selania Edwards, Cinnamon Elks, Doreen Marquez, Julie Nieto, Veronica Romero, Evelyn Salazar, Michelle Valdez, who was pregnant when she was killed, the timeline, an invisible man. The problem for the police was that the killer left almost nothing behind. The desert had bleached the bones and destroyed most of the evidence. There were no clothes, no bullets, no DNA from the killer. He was incredibly careful, or incredibly lucky. He was like a phantom. He moved through the lives of these women, took them, and then made them disappear into the dirt. The police had to build a case from almost nothing. They interviewed hundreds of people. They looked at old missing person reports. They tried to find any connection between the victims, other than their difficult lives. Theories. A few ideas came up. Maybe the killer was a pimp who punished the women. But there was no evidence of this. Maybe it was a group of people. But the way the bodies were buried seemed to be the work of one person. The most likely theory was that it was a single, organized serial killer who specifically targeted sex workers because he knew they were easy targets. One of the biggest challenges was the location itself. The West Mesa was being developed. Construction crews had been digging and moving dirt all over the area for years. It's possible that the killer's burial site was disturbed by a bulldozer, which is how that first bone came to the surface. It's also possible that more bodies are still out there, buried deeper, in places that haven't been searched yet. Over the years, a few suspects have been looked at, but nothing has ever stuck. Lorenzo Montoya, a man who was killed in 2006 after he strangled a prostitute in his trailer. Police found items belonging to other women in his home. His trailer was very close to the burial site. Some people think he was the bone collector, but he died before he could ever be questioned about it. Joseph Blee, another serial killer who was already in prison for crimes against sex workers in the area, but police could never link him directly to the West Mesa victims. The case is a chilling reminder of how some people can fall through the cracks. The bone collector chose his victims because he thought no one would care about them. He thought they were disposable. For years, he was right. They were missing, but the cases weren't connected. No one knew a predator was hunting on the streets of Albuquerque. Today, a memorial park stands on the West Mesa, a quiet place to remember the women and girls who were lost there. But there is no justice. The person who did this is still a complete mystery. He could be dead. He could be in prison for something else. Or he could still be out there, living a normal life. with a terrible secret buried in his past, just like the bones he buried in the desert. The case is cold, a collection of questions with no answers, and a killer who truly seems to have gotten away with it. The I-70 killer. In the spring of 1992, a silent predator haunted the American Midwest. He didn't have a memorable name like the Zodiac, and he didn't play games with the police. He was quick, quiet, and deadly. He moved along one of the country's biggest highways, Interstate 70, and in just 29 days, he left a trail of terror across 3 states. His targets were small stores in small towns, usually just a short drive from the I-70 exit. Places like dancewear shops, bridal stores, and small gift shops. He always attacked in the late afternoon or early evening, and he always went for people who were working alone. The killing spree started in Indianapolis, Indiana on April 8th. The victim was Robin Foldauer, a 26-year-old working at a Payless shoe store. She was shot in the back of the head. The cash register was empty. At first, it just looked like a tragic robbery. But 3 days later, it happened again. This time in Wichita, Kansas, over 500 miles away. 2 women, Patricia Smith and Patricia Magers, were working at a bridal shop called Lavon's. A customer came in and found both of them in a back room, shot in the head. Again, it looked like a robbery. Police in Kansas had no reason to think it was connected to the crime in Indiana. The killer kept moving. On April 27th, he was in Terre Haute, Indiana. Michael McCown, who was working at a ceramics store, was found shot in the back of a room. A few days later, on May 1st, he was back in Wichita, Kansas. He walked into a women's health store and shot 24-year-old Sylvia Kelly in a storage room. By now, police were starting to see a scary pattern. The method? The killer was always the same. He would enter a small shop, force the employee into a back room or storage area, and shoot them in the back of the head. He used the same type of gun every time, a .22 caliber pistol. The motive? He usually took a small amount of cash, never more than a few $100s. But the robbery seemed like an excuse. The real reason he was there was to kill. The way he did it was cold and businesslike. It wasn't messy or personal. It was an execution. The victims, with one exception, the final known attack happened on May 7th in St. Charles, Missouri. Sarah Blessing was working alone at a gift shop. The killer followed his pattern perfectly. He took her to the back room and shot her. But this time, there was a witness. Someone in a nearby shop saw a man leaving the store right around the time of the murder. They were able to give the police a description. The man in the sketch. This witness gave police their one and only real clue. It led to a composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch shows a white man in his 20s or 30s with longish, reddish blonde hair. He was described as being thin and clean-cut. It's a plain, average-looking face. It's a face that could belong to anyone. This sketch is the face of the I-70 killer. For 30 years, police have been showing this picture, hoping someone will recognize him. But he has never been identified. And then, just as suddenly as he started, the I-70 killer stopped. After the murder in Missouri, he just vanished. Why? Did he get scared? Did he get arrested for something else? Did he die? No one knows. This is one of the biggest mysteries of the case. Serial killers usually don't just stop. They either escalate their crimes until they get caught, or they are forced to stop for some other reason. The I-70 killer just faded away. Police have considered the possibility that he is connected to other crimes. There was a similar shooting in Texas in 1993, and another in Indiana in 1994 that fit the pattern. But they have never been officially linked. Think about how terrifying this was. This was a killer who used the American highway system as his own personal hunting ground. He could strike in one state in the morning and be hundreds of miles away in another state by night. He was a ghost on the interstate. The families of his 6 victims have been waiting for decades for an answer. They deserve to know who did this. But all the police have is that one 30-year-old drawing of an average-looking man who, for 1 month in 1992, was the most dangerous person on the road. He could have settled down, gotten married, had kids. He could still be out there, hiding his monstrous secret behind a normal life. Jack the Ripper. Oh, we have to travel back in time for our last case, back to the foggy, gaslit streets of London in 1888. This is the story of the killer who in many ways wrote the rulebook for serial murder. He's the original boogeyman, the Phantom of Victorian England, whose name is still known all over the world, even though we have no idea who he really was. Jack the Ripper. It all happened in a poor, crowded, and dangerous neighborhood called Whitechapel. During the autumn of 1888, a series of horrible murders terrified the city. The victims were all women, all poor, and all worked as prostitutes to survive in a brutal world. They were easy targets in a place where life was cheap. There are 5 victims who are considered the canonical 5, meaning the ones most experts agree were killed by the same person. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. The way they were killed was what made these crimes so shocking. The killer would cut their throats, but he didn't stop there. He would then mutilate their bodies in a way that showed he had some knowledge of human anatomy. He would remove organs with what looked like surgical precision. The police and doctors at the time were horrified. This wasn't just murder. It was butchery. The killer seemed to be taking trophies from his victims. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, suffered the most terrible fate. She was killed indoors in her own small room, which gave the killer plenty of time. When the police broke down her door, they found a scene so gruesome that even hardened officers were sick. Her body had been completely carved up. It was the work of a madman, but a madman with a steady hand and a sharp knife. The birth of a legend. What made Jack the Ripper a legend was not just the terrible crimes, but the way he seemed to communicate with the world. During the murder spree, the police and news agencies were flooded with hundreds of letters from people claiming to be the killer. Most of them were fakes from cruel pranksters, but a few stood out. The Dear Boss letter. This was the first letter that gained major attention. It was sent to a news agency and was full of taunts. The writer promised to keep killing and said the police would never catch him. It was in this letter that the killer gave himself his famous name. It was signed, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The name stuck. It was catchy, it was scary, and it turned the killer from a man into a monster. The From Hell letter. This was even more disturbing. It was sent to the leader of a neighborhood watch group. It came in a small box. Inside the box was half of a human kidney. The letter claimed that it was from one of the victims and that the writer had fried and eaten the other half. Medical tests at the time showed it was likely a human kidney. This suggested the killer was not just murdering people, but desecrating their bodies in the most awful way imaginable. These letters created a media sensation. The newspapers printed every scary detail. People all over the world were reading about this faceless killer in London. The public was in a panic. The police were under huge pressure to catch him, but they were in over their heads. They had never dealt with a killer like this before. The very idea of a serial killer didn't really exist yet. They had no forensic science as we know it today. No fingerprinting, no DNA. All they had were witness descriptions, which were often confusing and contradictory. Some people said they saw a man who looked like a gentleman. Others said he looked poor and shabby. He was a shadow who could look like anyone. The police investigated hundreds of people and had several key suspects. Montague John Druitt, a lawyer and teacher who was found dead in the river shortly after the last murder. His own family suspected he might be the killer. The timing was suspicious, but there was no real evidence to connect him to the crimes. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who worked as a hairdresser in Whitechapel. He had severe mental health problems and a known hatred of women. He was a strong suspect for the police at the time, but they never had enough evidence to charge him. Severin Klusowski, alias George Chapman, another immigrant from Poland who was convicted and executed years later for poisoning 3 of his wives. One of the lead detectives on the Ripper case said after Chapman was arrested, "You've got Jack the Ripper at last." He was a known woman hater and had some medical training. But in the end, they were all just theories. No one was ever charged. After the horrific murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November 1888, the killings suddenly stopped. Jack the Ripper disappeared. We will never know. Jack the Ripper was never caught, and his identity remains the most famous unsolved mystery in the history of crime. He was more than just a man. He was a phenomenon. He exposed the dark side of a world that was supposed to be civilized and modern. He showed that even in the biggest city on Earth, a monster could hunt in the streets, create a legend, and then vanish back into the fog, leaving only a bloody legacy and a name that still sends a shiver down the spine. These stories are hard to hear, but it's important to remember them. They remind us that the world can be a dangerous place, and that justice is not always guaranteed. The Zodiac, the Long Island Killer's other victims, the Bone Collector, the I-70 Phantom, and Jack the Ripper are more than just campfire stories. They were real people who did real harm, and their shadows still linger because their faces were never known. They are the ultimate proof that sometimes the monster you read about could be anyone. And some mysteries are never, ever solved. If you want to dive into a case that baffled police for decades before it was finally solved by a shocking DNA discovery, check out the video on your screen now.